The final 3 decades of Elizabeth I's reign transformed England from a vulnerable Protestant kingdom into a formidable European power, but at a devastating cost measured in lives, treasure, and mounting domestic strain. While propaganda successfully crafted the image of Gloriana and the Spanish Armada's defeat became national legend, the period's defining reality was sustained colonial violence in Ireland that claimed over 100,000 lives through deliberate famine and scorched earth warfare, combined with systematic religious persecution, factional court intrigue, and wars that brought England to the brink of bankruptcy. This was not the golden age of myth. From 1572 onward, Elizabeth presided over systematic atrocities that many modern historians term genocidal in intent, executed Mary Queen of Scots in a carefully orchestrated spectacle of plausible deniability, survived multiple assassination plots and a naval superpower's repeated invasion attempts, and watched her final favourite mount an armed rebellion that required his execution. By 1603, England had survived, but the aging queen died isolated, the treasury exhausted, and the succession uncertain until her final breath. The saga of Mary Queen of Scots reached its inevitable bloody conclusion through Sir Francis Walsingham's sophisticated entrapment operation, a masterclass in espionage that would define intelligence work for centuries. In 1586, Walsingham's carefully selected double agent Gilbert Gifford established what Mary believed was a secure communication channel at Chartley Castle. Letters hidden in beer barrels that Walsingham's cryptanalyst Thomas Philippes intercepted, painstakingly decoded, copied and resealed before delivery. The trap was exquisite in its design. Mary, desperate after 19 years of imprisonment, believed she had finally found a way to communicate with supporters undetected. When Anthony Babington's fateful letter arrived on July 6, 1586, detailing explicit plans to assassinate Elizabeth with 6 noble gentlemen, all my private friends, Mary's response on July 17th sealed her fate. She explicitly approved the plot. When all is ready, the 6 gentlemen must be set to work, and you will provide that on their design being accomplished, I may be myself rescued from this place. There is absolutely no doubt that Mary was guilty of treason regarding this specific plot. Although the moral complexity remains, Walsingham had deliberately created the communication channel to entrap her. After 19 years of increasingly harsh imprisonment, watching her health deteriorate and hopes fade, Mary had fallen into a carefully constructed trap. The forged postscript Philippes brazenly added to her letter, requesting the names of all conspirators, demonstrates the extent of manipulation involved. Yet Mary's authentic letter had clearly discussed the assassination without forbidding it, and under the terms of the Bond of Association, this alone sealed her fate. Her trial at Fotheringhay Castle on October 14th and 15th, 1586, was theatrical spectacle rather than judicial proceeding. Denied legal counsel, unable to call witnesses or even review the evidence against her, Mary nonetheless mounted a spirited and intelligent defence. She argued that English law had no jurisdiction over an anointed foreign queen who had come to England seeking sanctuary. The court of 36 carefully selected noblemen convicted her on October 25th. Elizabeth then delayed signing the death warrant for nearly 4 months, caught between political necessity and the unprecedented nature of executing an anointed queen. During this delay, Elizabeth attempted first to have Mary's jailer, Sir Amyas Pauly, murder her privately. He refused with admirable integrity, declaring he would not make a shipwreck of my conscience or shed blood without law and warrant. Only after this attempt failed did Elizabeth finally sign the warrant on February 1st, 1587, though she would later claim she never intended it to be used. The execution on February 8, 1587 was horrifically botched in a way that seemed to underscore the cosmic wrong of regicide. The executioner's first blow missed Mary's neck entirely, striking the back of her head as she prayed. Mary was heard to whisper, "Sweet Jesus." The second blow severed most, but not all of the neck, A third stroke with the axe was required to finish the grim task. When the executioner held up her head proclaiming, "God save the Queen," her auburn wig came away in his hand, revealing short grey hair beneath, the locks of a woman aged beyond her years by captivity. Her small dog, which had hidden in her blood-soaked petticoats throughout, emerged whimpering and had to be forcibly removed, dying soon after when it refused to eat. Mary was just 44 years old. Elizabeth's response combined genuine political calculation with masterful theatrical performance. She claimed the Privy Council had acted without her authorization, threw Secretary William Davison into the Tower for 19 months, though continued paying his salary and temporarily banished Cecil from court. Yet as historian John Guy demonstrates, this was carefully contrived plausible deniability. If Cecil covertly sealed the warrant and sent it to Fotheringhay behind her back, she could claim she had been the victim of a court conspiracy. The political theatre served real strategic purposes, giving Elizabeth diplomatic cover with Catholic powers while eliminating the focal point for every Catholic plot. Mary's son James VI of Scotland calmly accepted his mother's execution, having already secured his own succession prospects through secret negotiations and the Treaty of Berwick. But soon problems with Spain would arise again, and Mary's death only further fueled the fire. The enterprise of England represented Philip II's apocalyptic attempt to solve the Protestant problem through overwhelming military force, a crusade blessed by Pope Sixtus V with promises of 1,000,000 ducats upon success. The Armada that finally sailed from Lisbon on May 28, 1588, after multiple delays and setbacks, was made up of 130 ships carrying 30,000 men. But this impressive number concealed fatal weaknesses. Only 28 were purpose-built warships. The rest were hastily converted merchantmen and supply transports unsuited for naval combat. Most critically, only 88 to 100 artillery pieces aboard the entire fleet were big guns capable of actually sinking enemy ships. The rest were anti-personnel weapons useless in ship-to-ship combat. Philip II's fundamental strategic error was attempting to combine two incompatible plans simultaneously. The fleet must sail 1,000 miles from Spain through hostile waters, somehow coordinate with the Duke of Parma's 27,000 veteran troops waiting in Flanders, who had no secure communication method and no deep-water ports for the Armada to use, then ferry this army across the Channel to England while maintaining naval superiority. It was a plan that required everything to go perfectly, and nothing did. The Duke of Medina Sidonia, an aristocrat with extensive administrative experience, but absolutely no naval command background, had been Philip's desperate third choice after the experienced Marquis of Santa Cruz died and his second choice declined. Medina Sidonia achieved a remarkable feat, simply getting the unwieldy fleet to Calais largely intact. During the week-long running battle up the English Channel from July 29th to August 6th, only 3 Spanish ships were lost to English action despite constant harassment. The Spanish maintained their defensive crescent formation, a floating fortress against superior English gunnery and seamanship, frustrating English attempts to break their formation. Modern scholarship, particularly Geoffrey Parker and Colin Martin's definitive work, emphasizes that tactical and strategic failures rather than divine providence or weather determined the outcome. The decisive Battle of Gravelines on August 8, 1588, demonstrated devastating English tactical superiority earned through years of innovation. After English fireships broke the Spanish anchorage at midnight, causing panic as Spanish captains cut their anchor cables to escape, losing irreplaceable anchors, English warships closed to within speech of one another and poured concentrated fire into isolated Spanish vessels. Sir William Winter reported firing 500 rounds from his ship Vanguard alone, more ammunition than most Spanish ships carried in total. Spanish ships were said to be riddled with shot like a sieve, suffering nearly 2,000 casualties in hours before English ammunition ran out. The critical English advantage was technological revolution, not courage. John Hawkins's decade-long naval reformation had produced compact four-wheeled truck gun carriages, allowing rapid reloading in confined spaces. English guns could fire as fast as muskets, requiring just 4 men and 2.5 minutes per shot versus Spanish field-type carriages needing 6 men and 5 minutes minimum. Spanish gunners expected to fire once, then board for hand-to-hand combat. English ships could stand off and maintain sustained bombardment for hours. This tactical revolution, combined with sleeker, race-built warship designs that sacrificed cargo capacity for speed and maneuverability, gave England the world's most effective battle fleet, despite being outnumbered. The weather's role, though dramatic, was contributory, not decisive. The August storms that devastated the Spanish return journey around Scotland and Ireland killed 5,000 to 10,000 men and destroyed 24 to 27 ships off Ireland alone. Yet these ships were vulnerable precisely because English action had weakened their hulls with hundreds of cannonball impacts. They had lost anchors during the fireship panic and couldn't ride out storms, provisions were depleted after months at sea, and crucially, Philip II's planning had arranged no secure harbours or supply depots. English combat losses were minimal. 0 ships lost, approximately 100 men killed in action, although at least 2,000 sailors died from typhus and dysentery while the fleet remained mobilised awaiting the Armada's possible return. The war, however, was far from over. Spain, learning from failure, launched 3 more invasion attempts. And in 1601, they succeeded in landing 3,500 veteran troops at Kinsale, Ireland, nearly tipping O'Neill's rebellion to victory. The Anglo-Spanish War continued officially until the Treaty of London in 1604, costing England over £3.4 million and nearly bankrupting the realm despite victory. But Spain wasn't the only nation to feel the force of England's military experience, but the difference was this one was meant to be part of Elizabeth's kingdom, Ireland. Elizabeth's Irish policies evolved from attempted containment to systematic extermination, a transformation that would establish patterns of colonial violence replicated across the British Empire for centuries. Following the Northern Rebellion's suppression from 1569 in the north of England, methods emerged that would define England's approach to Ireland: terror as policy, famine as weapon, and civilian massacre as military strategy. Humphrey Gilbert's 1569 Munster campaign introduced these terror tactics with horrifying innovation, executing all found bearing arms regardless of age, then displaying their severed heads in rows, creating what witnesses called lanes of heads leading to his tent. Contemporary chronicler Thomas Churchyard recorded with disturbing approval, "He killed man, woman and child, and spoiled, wasted and burned, so that he left neither corn, nor horn, nor house unburnt. Mowers of grass or cutters of corn, none escaped." The First Desmond Rebellion from 1569 until 1573 saw these experimental tactics systematized into official policy. After crushing organized military resistance, English forces under Lord President Perrot deliberately destroyed all crops and cattle across entire regions, understanding that in pre-modern Ireland, this meant condemning the civilian population to death. Lord Justice Pelham reported with bureaucratic detachment about putting man, woman and child to the sword as standard operating procedure. The Second Desmond Rebellion in 1579 until 1583 escalated these policies dramatically. The Earl of Desmond, Gerald Fitzgerald, controlled Munster with approximately 3,000 soldiers and 20,000 active supporters from among the general population. Rather than simply defeating his forces militarily, Elizabeth's commanders chose to destroy the entire society that sustained them. The Smerwick massacre of November 10, 1580, shocked even 16th century sensibilities accustomed to brutal warfare. Lord Grey de Wilton captured Fort Del Oro, containing 600 Spanish and Italian papal troops after a 3-day siege. Despite their negotiated surrender under a displayed white flag, the universal symbol of surrender, Grey ordered every soul executed. Captain Walter Raleigh and Officer Mackworth personally supervised the systematic slaughter that followed. Soldiers were beheaded in organised batches of 20, their heads piled in neat pyramids. Pregnant Irish women found in the fort were hanged from the walls. Grey later defended this atrocity by claiming they were no soldiers but rogues and vagabonds, lacking a sovereign's commission, a legal technicality used to justify mass murder. What followed in Munster was systematic destruction on a scale that defied comprehension. Lord President Perrot's 1584 survey found the population had dropped from approximately 300,000 to under 100,000 in just 4 years. Contemporary accounts describe apocalyptic scenes that haunted even hardened soldiers. Edmund Spenser, the celebrated poet who participated in the campaign and received 3,000 acres of confiscated land as reward, wrote with a mixture of horror and justification. Out of every corner of the woods and glens they came creeping forth upon their hands, for their legs would not bear them. They spoke like ghosts crying out of their graves. They did eat the dead carrions, happy where they could find them. The 9 Years' War in 1594 began when Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, united Gaelic resistance in an unprecedented alliance. O'Neill was no mere rebel, but a sophisticated military commander who had studied English tactics and understood both traditional Irish and modern continental warfare. Initial English disasters included the catastrophic defeat at Yellow Ford in August 1598, where 2,000 English soldiers died, the worst English military defeat in Ireland. Essex's 1599 expedition with 17,000 troops, the largest army Elizabeth ever sent anywhere, failed completely through his incompetence and possible mental breakdown, contributing directly to his eventual execution. Lord Mountjoy's appointment in 1600 brought methodical scientific brutality. His strategy explicitly combined conventional military pressure with systematic famine creation through continuous crop destruction in a rolling campaign that gave civilians no time to recover. Sir Arthur Chichester, his subordinate, reported with evident distress, "We kill so many churls as it grieveth me to think that it is necessary to do this work." Fynes Morrison, Mountjoy's secretary, documented scenes that belonged more to apocalypse than warfare. No spectacle was more frequent in the ditches of towns and especially in wasted countries than to see multitudes of these poor people dead, with their mouths all coloured green by eating nettles, docks and all things they could rend up above ground. The war's end came through mutual exhaustion. English forces suffered 30,000 dead, mostly from disease, costing £2 million. Irish losses exceeded 100,000. Predominantly civilians deliberately starved or systematically slaughtered. O'Neill's submission came March 30th, 1603, just 6 days after Elizabeth's death, though he didn't yet know she had died. Modern historians' assessments are uniformly damning. Nicholas Canny, the preeminent historian of early modern Ireland, termed these campaigns genocidal in intent by any reasonable definition. David Edwards concluded the violence was both instrumental and ideological, intended to clear the land for English Protestant settlers. Contemporary Spanish captain Francisco de Cuellar, shipwrecked after the Armada, wrote, "These English, who are all Lutheran heretics, are great enemies of the Catholic faith, have no mercy with anyone." But Elizabeth's final conflict would be closer to home and her heart. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, represented Elizabeth's final attempt at recapturing youth through a favourite 34 years her junior. Stepson to Leicester, tall, charismatic and impulsive, Essex combined genuine military capability with dangerous political naivete and possible bipolar disorder. His 1596 Cadiz expedition succeeded brilliantly, capturing Spain's principal Atlantic port, destroying 34 ships and securing a £120,000 ransom. Yet the 1597 Azores expedition failed through poor planning. Essex's rivalry with Robert Cecil intensified as the Queen aged. His catastrophic 1599 Irish command, abandoning campaign to negotiate secretly with O'Neill, then deserting his post, triggered his downfall. He famously burst into Elizabeth's bedchamber on September 28, 1599, finding her without wig or makeup, which shattered her royal mystique. Elizabeth was a woman who had kept tight control over how she was presented to everyone: enemies, ordinary people, courtiers. Essex's arrogant intrusion reminded her how dangerously close she had allowed him in. House arrest, loss of monopolies, and mounting debt of £16,000 drove his desperation, and it wasn't long before he attempted to rebel against Elizabeth herself. The rebellion on February 8, 1601, 300 followers attempting to seize court, collapsed within hours. His trial on February 19th was predetermined, and execution on February 25th followed. Elizabeth reportedly never recovered, keeping his final letter in her possession. Psychologically, executing Essex represented executing her younger self's romantic possibilities. Elizabeth's final years saw mounting isolation. The so-called Second Reign from 1587 until her death was characterized by her closest advisors' deaths: Dudley in 1588, Walsingham in 1590, Hatton in 1591, and Burghley in 1598. Enormous Irish war drain on the treasury finances, and the aging Queen becoming increasingly isolated. The problem that had hovered in the background for Elizabeth's entire reign was now the paramount issue: who was going to succeed her throne? Multiple potential heirs created uncertainty. There was James VI with the strongest claim, but also Arbella Stuart through the Stuart line, and Edward Seymour, descended through the line of Mary Tudor, Elizabeth's aunt. Elizabeth refused naming anyone, leaving Robert Cecil, the son of William, who had since died, with no choice but to secretly negotiate with James from 1601. In January 1603, Elizabeth retreated to Richmond Palace. The Countess of Nottingham's death on February 24th triggered her final decline. She refused food, stood for hours on cushions, told Cecil, "Must is not a word to use to princes, little man." She died peacefully in the early hours of March 24th, 1603, aged 69. When asked about James inheriting, no longer able to speak, she reportedly gestured a crown around her head to indicate her agreement. Within hours, Cecil proclaimed James I as king. The transition was remarkably peaceful. Elizabeth's refusal to name an heir, seemingly dangerous, prevented civil war. This represented her final political masterstroke. Elizabeth's final 3 decades achieved national survival against overwhelming odds. England repelled Spanish invasion, maintained Protestant identity, secured Scottish alliance, crushed Irish rebellion, and emerged as significant European power with revolutionary naval capability. Yet the costs were catastrophic. Over 100,000 Irish people died, mostly civilians, through deliberate famine, contemporary descriptions of cannibalism, children eating dead mothers, populations dying with mouths green from grass. While much of these accounts were likely exaggerated for the purposes of justifying the otherness of Irish society, there had to be truth behind such brutal descriptions, and they became the blueprint for centuries of calculated policy for British colonisation. But equally, the financial exhaustion was severe. £5 million spent on wars against £392,000 of annual revenue nearly bankrupted England. Elizabeth's evolution from confident young queen to isolated monarch who possibly broke a lady's finger in rage, refused mirrors, believed her propaganda, and died tormented by ghosts reveals power's psychological toll. The Gloriana cult became a prison, the mask she couldn't remove even in death. The smooth succession vindicated Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary's blood, and not Elizabeth's, flows through subsequent British monarchs. Elizabeth was a woman tormented by her childhood, the threats of assassination, and the pressures of holding the throne alone. It's easy to paint her as something black and white, either the golden Gloriana inspiring her soldiers to defend her kingdom and devoted only to her country rather than a husband, or as a ruthless tyrant cutting down any who threatened her existence, even her own cousin Mary. But the truth is more complicated, as Elizabeth was both. On the one hand, it's difficult for us to judge her because she was in an unprecedented position. and a lesser monarch might have crumbled under the weight of being queen, she lived through a time of change and conflict when what would become the modern age started trying to push through in bloody and violent ways. At the same time, Elizabeth was well aware of the atrocities carried out under her orders and in her name, and we cannot ignore that she was happy for these to happen. But unlike the previous Tudors in her family, she understood how to use propaganda to full effect, how to hide information she didn't want to be public knowledge, and how to blind people through the brilliance of her cult. But Elizabeth kept England independent and Protestant, a goal that was pushed and desired by her court and advisors from the very beginning, but at a price measured in Irish corpses, Catholic priests disemboweled, soldiers dying in bogs, and crown lands sold for wars achieving limited gains. Behind Gloriana's mask was a brilliant, temperamental woman who made ruthless decisions, presided over systematic atrocities, survived through political genius and stubbornness, and died having saved England but left it exhausted. Her reign's final decades weren't golden, but a grinding struggle where England won, and many paid the price.